Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chof Aleph Amud Beis. Start the new Mishnah Daf Chof Aleph Amud Aleph, the eighth and final parak of Masechet Shekalim. The previous parak brought dinim, different laws in regards to findings of money, meat, and animals. Our Mishnah discusses other findings, specifically in the realm of Tuma and Tahara. Says the Mishnah, Kol harukin hanimtzoim b'Yushalayim taharin. In regards to roik, we know midiaraisa, the zav and zava, the yoledes and the nida, their roik is an av hatuma. That means if a person comes in contact with it, either physically touches it or carries it, he becomes tamei. So too, if a kli comes in contact with such roik, such spit, then they will also become tamei. The Chacham were goizer also the tumas zav of a nachri. That means the nachri's spit also is tamei. So here it states that the rukin, the spit that is found in Yushalayim, however, is tor. Even though normally spit, which is found, we have a concern that it is tamei, and therefore the Chacham were goizer that from a chashash safek midiraisa it's tamei. But if it's found in Yushalayim, however, it's tahorin. Chutz mishel shuk ha'elyon, with the exception of the upper shuk of Yushalayim. Div Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosi is choylek, and he says in Yushalayim, he says even in Yushalayim, the spit is also considered to be tamei. However, he makes a chiluk. Bishar kol yemois hashana, if it's during the rest of the days of the year, that means excluding the ole regalim, excluding the shalosh regalim, then he says shebe'emtza tmein, shebetztodin taharin. If you find the spit in the middle of the roads where people would walk, then it is tamei. However, if you find them on the sides of the road, then it is tahor. In other words, it's assumed that the people who, during the rest of the year, are walking in the middle of the roads themselves are tmeim, and therefore the spit that's found is coming from them, whereas from the sides of the roads it's coming from people who are tohor. That's in regard to Shar Yemois Hashana. However, b'shas haregel shebe'emtz taharim shebestodin tmeim, there it's the opposite. B'bnei sheha mu'otin mistalkin l'tzodin. During the regel, where most people are already tohor, then it's the miyut that is then mistalek to the sides, and therefore, if you found the spit in the middle of the road, then it is tor. Off on the side, it's going to be tamei. The Mishnah goes on to say, in regards to kalim, kel kalim hanimtzoim b'Yushalayim. If you found kalim in Yushalayim, so it depends. Derech yerida lebeis hatvila tmein. If it's in the road going down, walking down to the Beis HaTfilah, so then it is Tamein, because the assumption is you're taking then those Kalim to be Matbil, and therefore if they fell and were found there, it must be they fell and they're Tamei. V'derech aliyah taharin, shelo ki yiridasan aliyasan. Di Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, but if it's the derech aliyah, then the assumption is coming away from the Beis HaTfilah, whereby if it fell, it must have been already tohor, already was then matbil in the mikvah. And therefore he says, depending on if it's going on the way down or on the way up. Now, when it says on the way up that it is tohor, it's really lav dafka, because other places outside of these drachim going either down or up to from the Beis HaTfilah will also be, if it's found in the ground is found, these kalim, even in Yushalayim, would be also tor, according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosi is in more mekel. He says kulan taharin. That means even if they're found on the way down to the Beis HaTfilah, then it's also assumed to be tahor. His svara is that the same way that a person carries kalim that need to be brought in the mikvah, to be matbil in the mikvah, so too he also carries with him other kalim that are tahor themselves. So if it was found even in the derech yerida, we can assume that it is tahor. Kulan tahor chutz min hasal v'hamagrefa v'hamaritza miyuchodin likvorois. However, the exception is those things are used for the burial. And therefore, if it's going to be a sal, a certain basket that they used to take the bones in, or magrefa, or a rake, or a maritza, or a hammer that is going to break, let's say, stones for the Beis HaKvaros, then all of that is assumed to be tamei. In the times of Chazal, the way they would bury the dead was they would first bury the dead, and then once the bones only remain, then they would transfer the bones to a burial place that is by their mishpacha. And therefore, it was common to then collect the bones into a sal, into a basket, by using a magrefa, something to rake the bones into, as well as a maritza. They would use this hammer to then make the burial site available by breaking different stones. And therefore, these things are all going to be considered to be tamei. The Mishnah goes on to say, sakin, shenim says a base, b'yudalid, shoichet b'miyad. Here, we're discussing Yudalid ben Nisan. That's the day that the Korban Pesach is brought. And therefore, since it's shechted on Bein Ha'arboyim, the afternoon of Yud Dalid, so if a person finds a knife on Yud Dalid, the assumption is that whoever dropped that knife, we're talking about a knife that does not have a siman, that person who dropped the knife had already been matbil the knife the day before, if it was tamei. Because since the din is that once you're matbil a kli, it needs herav shemesh, it needs also the night to then become tahor. So in order to be able to use that knife on Yud Dalid for the shechting of Korban Pesach, you have to already have been matbil the day before on Yud Gimel. So the assumption is that if it was found on Yud Dalid, it was already then tahor. And you can go ahead and use it, since anybody can shecht a Korban Pesach. It doesn't have to be a kohen, like any other korbanos. So therefore, this person who found such a knife without a siman can use such a knife on Yud Dalid. However, if he found it on the 13th of Nisan, so then he has to go ahead and matbil it again, even if it was already tahor before, we don't know. Misafek, he has to be matbil again, because he has to assume that the person did not yet matbil it. Koifitz bezeu bezeh shoyneu matbil. If it's a koifitz is not a shechting knife, but rather it's a type of sharp knife that is used not only for cutting meat, but particularly to breaking the bones. Now, what's unique about the Korban Pesach is that Korban Pesach has a certain lav, that there's an iser to break the bones of the Korban Pesach, unlike all other korbanos. So therefore, if he finds a koifitz, whether he finds it on Yud Gimel or Yud Dalid, so the assumption is not going to be used for the Korban Pesach, and therefore he has to assume that it has not yet been nobody was matbil it, whereby maybe that would matbil only towards the end of Yud Dalid, for they would have it then for the Chagiga on Tezvav. So therefore he has to be matbil no matter which day it is, whether it's Yud Gimel or Yud Dalid ben Nisan. If the 14th comes out to be on Shabbos, shoichet bo miyad. So then we're talking about, let's say, a koifitz that he found. So here, the word shoichet is lav dafka here. It means that he can use the koifitz. Meaning to say that since we said before that if you find the koifitz on Yud Dalid, then you have to be matbil it. But over here, since it's Yud Dalid Shabbos and you can't be matbil a kli, to matar a kli on Shabbos, so therefore the assumption is that he did it the day before, whereby you can go ahead and use that koifitz for the Tesvav on Yontif when he begins using it for the Korban Chagiga of Tesvav. The Mishnah continues on Chof Aleph Amud Beis b'Tezvav shoichet b'miyad. If he founds the koifitz on Tesvav, the 15th, then certainly he can then be shoichet miyad. Again, the assumption is that he had already was matbil it before on Yud Dalid for Tesvav. Our Mishnah concludes, Nimtza kishuro lesakin, harehu kesakin. If he finds the koifitz that is kosher, tied together with the sakin, so since the sakin, we can assume again, was already, somebody was matbil it already before, let's say he finds it on the 14th, so we can assume they already is matbil on the 13th. So even though normally the koifitz we assume that he did not, but since it's now tied together with the sakin, with the knife, we assume that he was matbil together with the sakin, and therefore it's going to be something that is tohor. The Mishnah had stated that, according to Rabbi Meir, in regards to that which we say, the roik that he finds in Yerushalayim is tohor. The exception is if it's in the upper shuk of Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, what's the difference between the upper shuk and all of a sudden that it's becoming, that you have to assume that the roik is tamei? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Avi Mishem Rabbi Yoshu ben Levi, to explain, Katzron shel Nochrim hayasham. There were launderers of Nachri that were up there that would then be on the upper shuk of Yerushalayim, and therefore if you found spit, the assumption is came from them, and therefore it's tamei. Again, because Chazal were goyzer tuma on the roik of Nachri. Rav Chanina says another reason why you can assume it's the roik of the katzrin of the not of the katzrin but of Nachrim rather is because oroidos hayu noichim b'Yerushalayim, because there were wild donkeys that the Nachrim would slaughter, would kill in Yerushalayim, in the upper shuk of Yerushalayim. So therefore, if there's spit that's found there, mistama came from the Nachrim. The Gemara goes on to say, "V'hayu ole regalim mishtakin bedam ad arkuvo sehen." The Gemara tells that there was so much blood from these wild donkeys that were butchered that they had blood all the way up until their knees. However, the Gemara says, "Ubo lifnei chachamim." They came before the chachamim, v'lo amru lohen davar, and they didn't say anything. Meaning to say, they said that be'etzem, that the blood of this nevela is not going to mitame. There's a machloikis, which the Gemara now is going to get into. What is the status of the blood of nevela when it comes to the meat of nevela? So if it's a kazayis, so that is going to be mitame. However, if it's the bones or the sinews, or let's say the skins of the animal, that is a nevela, it's not mitame. What about the blood? Is the blood mitame? So is a machloikis, which Gemara is going to say right now. According to this opinion of the chachamim, the blood of the nevela is not mitame. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Maisa b'pir de b'shel beis Rabbi Shemesa. This is a Gemara that we saw in Daf Tes Amud Aleph. He brings a Maisa that there was a mule in the household of Rabbi that died. V'taru es dameh mishum nevela, and they were metaher the blood of this nevela. Rabbi Elazar shoal the Rabbi Simon. Rabbi Elazar, he wanted to ask Rabbi Simon, ad kama, how much blood was there that they were not metame, that they were metaher from this blood? V'lo agive, and he did not respond. Shol Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, he asked Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Levi, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said to him, Ad revis tohor yoiser mikan tame. Only until a revis is it going to be tohor. More than that would be tame. In other words, over here, this mule that died, the blood was only a little bit, it was less than a revis. Therefore, they were metaher. But if it was be more than a revis, then he holds that indeed the blood of the nevela is metame. Ubosh Rabbi Elazar deLechazer leRabbi Simon shemu usa. The Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar was perturbed because Rabbi Simon did not answer the halacha that he was asking about. He had to then ask Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and certainly Rabbi Simon, who said name Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, this Maisa, would have known the answer to the question. So he was bothered. Why didn't he answer that question? Fine. The Gemara now says, Rabbi Bibi Hava Yosef, Masni Hadein Uvda. Rabbi Bibi was sitting and he said over this Maisa that took place, that means the household of Rabbi had a mule that died and they were metaher, the blood. Omar Le, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, Ad Kama, you want to understand what was the status of this blood that they were metaher. Omar Le, Ad Revis Tor Yosim Mikan Tome. They said until a Revis, it was Tohor. More than that would be Tome. Uboit Bey. And it says that he treated him disrespectfully. In other words, he said the answer in a very curse way. So we see over here that he's telling you that there is such a thing as dam nevela being metame, only less than a revis is tohor. Omar le Rabbi Zriko begin dahava sholoch at boit bay. So he asked him, why were you answering the question in such a curt way? After all, he asked you a question, and you're going to treat him disrespectfully for that? Omar le, he said to him, no, that's not the reason why I answer in such a way. Begin deloy chavis daiti bi. The reason why I answer that way is because I didn't have proper yishuv hadas. The Omar Bichanin, because he explains his predicament. The pasuk states in regards to the toichocha in Parshas Kisavoy, it says the following: "V'hoyu chayecha teluyim lecha." Your lives will be then on the brink; it'll be hanging. Mineged ubachareda laila v'yoymam. You're going to be in fear day and night. V'loy samim b'chayecha. You're not going to have trust in your own life. So now the Gemara explains this pasuk, and based on this pasuk, the explanation of this pasuk is a justification for why he answered him in such a terse fashion. It says in the pasuk, your lives will be hanging on the balance. Somebody does not have land and he has to buy enough wheat for the year, so he doesn't know what it's going to be for the coming year. And somebody who's fearful day and night, he's somebody who takes he has to buy once in a while his wheat from the merchant. So he's dependent on this merchant. Maybe the merchant will provide, maybe not. But he certainly doesn't have enough bread for the year. And the last part of the pasuk, you can't even trust in your own life. This one who is dependent on the daily baking of the baker. So he's always in a state of concern. And I, as one who is in so degree of poverty, I am somebody who has to then rely on the baker. Maybe the baker will run out of bread to provide for me. Okay, so now the Gemara wants to conclude on what the question was before in regards to blood of nevela. Is blood of nevela metame altogether or not? If you say it's not, so it doesn't make a difference this year. If you say it is, so the first up until a revis is not metame. Beyond a revis, it is metame. So makedoin, the Gemara wants to, what's the conclusion? Hey, Rabbi Yoshua ben Petero, al dam nevela shu tor. He says dam nevela is always tahor. Doesn't make a difference the amount of dam. And the Gemara says, oh, so that's a Mishnah that was just quoted. And then Rabbi Yeshua ben Petura. Ma'utor, the Gemara wants to say that that's not what he meant. What does it mean, tahor? Tahor melahachshir. It means that the dam nevela is tahor from becoming susceptible to tuma. One of 7 liquids have to come in contact with the food before it becomes susceptible to tuma. And therefore the blood of nevela, they want to say, is what he meant by saying it's not going to be metame. But holitamois metame. But the diuk would be, however, it is going to metame. In other words, yes, blood of nevela does metame. Toman Tanina, we learn, however, in a Mishnah over there, it states, dam hasheretz metame. It says the dam of a sheretz is metame, kibsoro metame ve'in machshir. Like it's basar, it is metame, but it's not machshir. It means to say that a sheretz, one of the shmona shrotzim, is an avatuma, not only is their basar metame, but also their blood is metame. Ve'in lonu kayotzei boy. The Mishnah concludes over there, and we have nothing that is like this. This is unique to the sheretz. So here it's mashma that only when it comes to the sheretz do we say the blood is like its basar. Mashma, the nevela, the blood, is not like the basar, and therefore, unlike the basar, which is metame, the blood is not metame. The Gemara says, no, that's not the proper reading. You can doiche and say ve'ein lanu ki yotzei. When it says ein lanu ki yotzei ba, there's nothing similar to the sheretz that the blood is like its basar. That means kishir to masoi, just like the shear of the basar, like the shear of the basar of a sheretz is only ke'adosha. It's a small shiur. So too the blood is like an adosha. But its dam, even in nevela, is yes metame kibisaro, because there it's a different shear. There it's a shear of a kezayis. So the Gemara wants to say, what is the conclusion? Indeed, it's a machlokes amoroin whether we say dam and nevela is metame or not. Chad amar tamei vechad amar tor. One says it's tamei, one says it's tor. Man amar tamei kirabi Yehuda. Uman damar tamei kirabi Yeshua ben Pesura. So there's a machlokes amorim, which is really a machlokes tanoim, whether dam is metame or not. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it is metame. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesura, it is not metame. Omer Rav Avduma demin nechusa v'yeyus, and it's indeed correct what you said. The Rabbi Yehuda Marayna the Rabbi Nisiya Hava, because that mice that we brought in the beginning of the sugya, that Rabbi had a mule that died and they were metahiret, that was indeed the psak din of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that really dam is yes metame, but up until a revius it's not, and therefore over there in that incident it was less than a revius whereby he was metaher, and therefore again Rabbi Yehuda Marayna the Nisi, he was the one who was the Mara Hara in the house of the Nasi Hava, and therefore to say that indeed he is the one who holds that dam nevela is metame is correct, whereas the Bar Plukta is Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesara who says that dam nevela is never metame. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah, and again this seems to be a repetition of what we had before, because the beginning of the Mishnah stated, according to Rabbi Meir, that the spit of the upper shuk of Yerushalayim, that is mitame. So says the Gemara, Lokein Amar Beyabo B'Shem Rabbi Yosi ben Chanina Lo Gozer al Roikin Sheb Yerushalayim, that they were not Gozer Roikin Yerushalayim. So why are you saying the upper spit, the upper shuk of Yerushalayim? If you found spit, it is tamei. They weren't Gozer Roik and Yerushalayim. The Gemara answers what it answered above. Ha'itma alei Rabbi Avim b'Shem Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. It was taught in his name. Katzeron shel Nachrim Hayashom. The launderers, Nachri launderers, they were present in the upper shuk of Yerushalayim, whereby if you found spit, mistamai came from them, and therefore it is tamei. The Mishnah states in the Hemshech that is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Yosi says that it depends on where in Yerushalayim you find the spit. He says a difference if it's derech aliyah or derech yerida. So Gemara now brings the following brisa. Bishar yemois hashana, if it's during the rest of the year that is not one of the sholosh regalim, the brisa says hatmeim mahalchin shiboilis v'atar mahalchin minatzad. The tmeim would walk in the middle path, and the taharim would walk on the side, and therefore that's what Rabbi Yossi is saying, that if you found spit therefore in the middle, then you're going to then have to assume that it's tamei, and if you find spit on the sides, then it's going to be tahor. That's the rest of the year. And therefore, during the rest of the year, the taharim who are walking stam, the tmeim, say to them, if you want to then be careful, you must go to the sides. B'shas haregel, however, during the shalosh regolim, it's different. It's the opposite. The taharim walk in the middle, and it's the tmeim that walk on the side. Hatmeim mahalchim stam, v'ataharim oimim lehem parushu. Then when the tmeim walk, if they were to walk in the middle, the taharim would say, parusho, go to the sides. Parushu, and go to separate to the sides. Okay. The Mishnah mentioned that in regards to Kalim, so in Kalim, there's also a machlokes. Rabbi Meir says whatever kelim you find in Yerushalayim depends on the derech, if it's yerida or derech aliyah. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says no, it's always going to be tahor, with the exception of the sal, the magrefa, and the maretza, which is used for kvura. Says the Gemara, the Gemara asks, didn't he say loy gozu ala kelim b'Yerushalayim? According to Rabbi Meir, didn't they say that the kelim were not part of the gezerah in Yerushalayim? That if you find kelim in Yerushalayim, that it's not tamei. Gemara says, according to Rabbi Meir, mekivan shenimtzu derech yerida lebeis hatvila nasu hochiach. If you found them, however, in the pathway that's going down to the beis hatvila, Rabbi Meir says that you can assume that kli was on its way to be somebody to be matbil that kli, and since it fell from him on his way down to the beis hatvila, you can assume then it's proven that this is indeed a kli that is tamei. In regards to Rabbi Yossi's opinion that all of Yerushalayim, the kelim are all tahor, with the exception of the magref of the sal and the meritza. Now a meritza is something that breaks down rocks. The Gemara brings in a brisa, Shaul haya kare oisan tziparin. He would call it tziparin. Why would he call this meritza tziparin? Mandar mitziparin shahaya doime tziparin. It was doime to a fingernail because it was a sharp knife that had a sharpness at a head that was used to then breaking the rocks. Mandam meritza shemeritza is ha'even the beis hakvaros. Where the other mandam calls it meritza because it crushes the rocks. Koifitz v'chulei. The Mishnah at the end stated a din in regards to finding a koifitz. Normally, when you find the koifitz and you dalid, so then you have to then go ahead and matbil it, because since a koifitz is not used for the Korban Pesach, because there's an Easter to break the bones of the Korban Pesach, so you have to assume that he didn't matbil until before the Shkia. Unlike the knife, where we assume that he was matbil a knife found on Yudalit the day before, because it needs Herav Shemesh, to be then used on Yudalit for Shchita as Korban Pesach. So the Mishnah concludes, however, if you find a koifitz that is koshur to the sakin, so then you have to assume that just like the sakin is tohor, then the koifitz is also tohor. He was matbil the koifitz together with the sakin. However, the Gemara now brings a brisa. This is the exact opposite. Tani hasakin kishura law hareze kamoisa. If you find a sakin that is kosher to the koifitz, then just like we have to assume that the koifitz itself, we were not matbil it, so therefore if you found it, you have to be matbil again. So too, the sakin that is kosher to the koifitz, you would have to also matbil it once again.